Give me a thumbs up or a yes online, please.
I hear you, Michelle.
Can't hear you at all. Yeah, and good morning, Michelle.
Yeah, can you speak up, please?
Yes, I can project. Not a problem for me. All right, well, welcome back, everyone. Hope you had it was a lot to go through. So wanted to kind of give ourselves a little bit of time this morning to see if anything else kind of had time to think through and talk through things at dinner for those of you that went out. See if any other questions came up or thoughts arose related to everything that we covered yesterday.
They say you're cutting it.
If I stand closer to it, will it be nicer?
Maybe.
If I stand behind the camera, will it be nicer? Nothing came up for anyone?
They say that's better.
Okay.
I switched to this microphone.
So we got our audio guy, our tech guy here. He's got things under control. Always pushing
A
up.
couple minutes later, so.
Okay, okay.
They're saying it's the connection, probably not the mic.
Yeah, probably. It might settle down and maybe if you're in the room and can like get off the Teams meeting or kind of like manage what the Wi-Fi, that might help too. But I will say, Mr. Buzo sent out a notice this morning that nationwide Teams is having issues. So we'll do our best with the technology that we have and hope Microsoft gets it back together and we stay on track. Yeah, it is what it is. Okay, well, today, so yesterday was pretty big picture, right? We were talking about some pretty big concepts and looking at kind of some things that are coming in the future and opportunities for us to think about data a little bit differently. Today, we're going to kind of get down into some data sets. We're going to talk about organizational data and frequency data, some of the things we're doing with that. So that's yesterday, Chris Strobel asked about how we were going to utilize reference data, right? So these are reference data sets. And so this is kind of our first big foray into starting to manage these reference data sets that way. Let's see, what else are we going to talk about? Oh, we've got some just kind of an update on how we're looking at managing the data around fuels treatment perimeters. So we've got a really, really good process in place for our wildfire perimeters. And so Skip and the folks are going to talk about how they're looking at doing the fuel stuff. We'll talk a little bit about Edge. You know, we talk about Edge a lot, and we do that primarily because we just want you to start, you know, get it in your head that that's a tool that we're going to start using more and more. And then Keith and Chris are going to share some updates with NASF. So I think, like I said last night, I think this is really good for us to hear what's happening from a data perspective with NASF data, because there's just a lot of value to it, right? There's a lot of great stuff that they're doing. And then we'll talk about the DOI fuels updates and then the business knowledge blueprints. So we've referenced this a little bit. If you may have seen some emails from Gabriella from the Data Standards and Terminology Board. We're really trying to look at how we do our definitions, how we collect our business rules, and again, trying to disambiguate. No, I cannot say that word. I thought I had it, but I just can't. Remove ambiguity. How about that? From our terminology and our data as much as possible. And so this is a methodology that we're using, and actually Chris and Forest Service started looking at this book, and then we started looking at it in Wildland Fire. And now Lynn has got, I think you guys are doing it with the DOI, is it the DOI? Yeah. So DOI is starting to look at this book as well. And so it's like, oh my gosh, like, can you imagine if Forest Service and DOI and we're actually using the same methodology for managing terms and definitions, like what that would mean for us in fire, right? It's just, yeah, kind of exciting and unusual opportunities. So So we're just gonna do a little intro to that and kind of talk about what that means and some of the work that's going on around that. So today is kind of, Lauren gets to lead a lot of stuff because it's more business than the technology stuff. And so again, this is where we're really getting into those kind of governance type discussions, because this is really where we're talking about how we want to manage the data in a way that has potentials to impact your applications and the way you do your business. So looking forward to it. Anybody have any questions or thoughts about any of that? Okay, we'll get started.
It's like, we're coming up with you, what's happening? Here.
No,
Yeah,
I
I
need
did.
the computer or not, so.
Watch that.
You want me to display this kind of stuff?
Yeah, that's the thing I want to share, very definitely.
Okay.
So,
Where should I put it?
do you want to share?
Just join the meeting. Share.
I've got it.
Then I don't need to share. Oh.
Suck it in.
So while Lauren's getting set up, we are going to start talking about, she and I are transitioning, so we're working together on a couple of these projects. And this first one we'll talk about is the combination of data that's within the organizational information systems and then the unit ID system. And it's really sort of a two-headed snake, we'll call it, or two-headed bonus situation. Whereas we'll combine the data. Can they hear me?
You guys here online?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. So we'll combine the data. But then we also have to figure out how systems will be using it. Right? So that's what I mean by the two-headed snake. So what we've done is we've started with, okay, here's a basic timeline. And mostly we put it together for folks to pick apart for us. What did we miss? What do we need to add? I mean, certainly it is high level, and we have certain steps that we've discussed within each step, each highlighted area that you're going to see in front of you, as far as the work that needs to be done in order to achieve it. And again, just sort of the basic timeline. So those first four, Lauren, go ahead.
We're definitely trying to make sure that we capture all the needs and in this time frame. But if we need to flex stuff around to accommodate, we certainly can. But we've basically got the we were looking at the development time and looking back, and that's where we plugged a lot of this in. But again, to meet the needs of the applications, we can certainly be flexible here. This is not etched in stone.
And what it would mean to you. So of course, okay, so we started off with developing the timeline and then develop the implementation plan. And the big thing was honestly was having Dawn on so that we could figure out some of the technical requirements behind it to combine the data within Edge. And then what's that service going to look like? Is it just a URL for the systems to connect to? How often everyone wants to do an update? It's just going to be changing those who have used unit ID, changing it over. But then there's the more complicated ones like Wildcat and IROC, who use both, right? So they use organizational information systems in one way, and then you validate, or you just validate on all of it out of OIS. All of it out of OIS. I think it's Wildcat that does both in essence. Yeah, so Wildcat, because they have an authentication via OIS, but they validate against what's in unit ID. So there's just those conversations, and the reason you keep hearing about it is so you can think about it. And are there things that we have missed that you need to bring up for the conversation? So the plan. So we met with all those folks that are up there, and those are basically the PMs and the leaders from those applications, and I'm talking OIS, Unit IDX and Edge, to proof of concept, basically. I'm sure we're all gonna use that as a drinking game later, but proof of concept that yes, we can do this and what it would look like. And are we all still on board? Rochelle's been talking about this. I know I've been talking about this since April of 22. Publicly, it was actually the first thing that Rochelle asked me to do when I came on. So October of 21. So that's how long we've been kind of thinking this through and trying to get an idea of how it would work, and then socializing it at every opportunity that we can. So currently Edge has a data set. So I'm looking at Gabriella of both OIS and Unit ID. We just got from Rotifer yesterday the most recent export from OIS. And so that's all well and good because we're combining apples and oranges. So the structure is different, right? That's not all the same. I'm trying to think of OIS, it might be called government entity, but in Unit IDs, it's called agency. And we've got some gray area we've all talked about what an agency is and what it is not. So those are the pieces that as we can combine. Oh, go ahead.
Well, it's just, as we were talking about, you were just saying that when you move it over, you are looking at overhauling the big scheme and all to fit the needs moving forward. Who are you bringing into the requirements around that, or ways that it's going to be leveraged for?
Gabriella. and it was Andrew.
Yeah, I think we possibly see if maybe like Travis would get involved. There's a way
simpler than
that
us
we don't
doing it,
want
for
people
sure.
to use this for like that they need a like field sample structure and the over of how that structure they were originally looking to tap into some of this stuff. Possibly, I think there might be an overlap, so I just want to see if there's a future opportunity. If we have to think about where you guys are headed with this, that we could then leverage this our designs. Still thread.
I think it's a really good question. I think it's a valid question. So what we started to do, Gabriella and Andrew and I actually, where we looked at the structure, what we need, what we're using. You know, we're currently using data again in this sort of apples and oranges concept. Whereas in the Unit IDX, we have, for example, we call it wildfire roles. And so, but really we started to really break apart what wildfire roles are. And actually it's starting to look more like, okay, this is what a protection unit is, and this is what a jurisdictional unit is. And is this Unit ID just one, or is it both? Or so in all those business uses, and I think that's what you have it broken out, right? Just, yeah. Is what add flags, add to the structure.
Well,
I feel like it's been,
talk about line or something.
Yeah.
So if this is a fit or if it's not.
and what were you?
Well, what I was going to say is that organizational data has been a topic of discussion for a long time. And one of the things that we're doing is working on developing concurrence memos that from the data management program to with it on some of this stuff. And so as I was working on this one for organizational data, I kind of was just going through because it's like, we've been talking about this stuff forever, right? And I started like listing all of the task groups and there's task groups that the NWCG Executive Board created. There's task groups that have been created under the Data Management Committee. Going back to like 2012 was when there was like this big push on organizational data. Well, the first big push on organizational data was back with Ross days and trying to figure some of that stuff out. And then in 2012, there was a flurry of activities around organizational data. And then those task groups under the Data Management Committee kind of continued. So, you know, we went through and did a bunch of changes to vocabulary. In 2017 and 2018, we had 8 new glossary terms. We modified 6 terms and we archived 2 terms, all related to trying to get some consistency about how we talk and think about organizations and the roles that they perform in wildland fire. And so really, we're just trying to take all of that work that we had done under these various task groups and in these other discussions and bring that together. And we know that in OIS, I mean, that data is really operational, right? It's about how we support and understand the organizations and the roles that they're playing as we're getting resources out. Unit IDs are part of that, but it's a code, right? So really, when you think about it, there's a code associated with an organization. OIS, so I think Steve had a question about what is the atomic unit, right? And I think what we're trying to do with this is utilize as much as possible that idea of getting data from authoritative data sources. So like Fish and Wildlife Service has really good information, really good data about their bureau and the hierarchies, the relationships, the, you know, all of that kind of stuff about their bureau. And we would want to use that data, right? And so what this really is looking at is saying, if we can go to Fish and Wildlife Service and Fish and Wildlife Service says, this is our organizational structure, these are valid refuges, this is, you know, these are the names, these, you know, then that's what we want to use in fire. And in the past, we've had challenges with, you know, somebody decides, hey, I want to have my own unit over here and I want to call it XYZ, right? And it doesn't really have anything to do with that bureau's structure. And so we want to let the states and the tribes and the agencies tell us what their organizational structure is, tell us what the roles are that that organization has, and then provide that information from a single source. And so, so that's really what we're trying to get to. So what I would say, my goal for this is that eventually we're going to transition where everybody, any application that has organizational data is going to point to this organizational reference data set. And that's how they're going to describe the organizations that are used in their business processes. So it's kind of one of those weird things. It's like, yes, we want to understand how applications are using organizations in their business processes, but it's going to be kind of a coming together, right? Of making sure that we continue to meet that need, but there's probably going to have to be shifts that are made in order to be consistently using the same organizations across all applications. Lynn?
Hi, this is Lynn. Organizational code is a really big topic. The government trying to figure out. So there's several efforts that do not go very far. So I just don't name which ones failed. But not long ago, OPM is trying to do this unique federal ID. Okay, and then I went to the first 2 meetings and then did not hear a thing anymore. So I know in our wildland fire program, there's so many units, right? We have to organize them. But while you organize them, and there's no order from the top yet, but I just want to make sure you're aware of they are doing something, and what do we do be able to, right? And the spread down and the connect. Then so there's several things I know. For the definition of agency, it is per U.S. Code 551. I send the link. There's a government official. But we should stay with. Yeah, we should stay with this kind of thing if there is one, right? And then with the agency name and the code, OMB has one for CPEC for investment. Treasury has one for the account code, and the NIST has one for the security. And tell me, there's more. Okay, so in the Edge, actually, we did it, like I say, here's a DOI, here's other related federal agency we'll work with, Forest Service, USDA, FEMA, NARA, NIST, right? We're trying to do that level of connection, but it's high enough. It's not reached your program level yet. And during the process, I find that the fast code Treasury use,
Yeah.
when Congress acknowledged that this program exists, they will create a fast code in the Treasury for that program. So at that time, account code at the top level of the program code. It's super high level. It's just Congress say, yes, this wildland fire exists and with a code, right? And underneath that, I don't know who's managing what. So what I'm trying to work with this code is that make sure, and with that code, there is a U.S. code associated with, so to connect with the Congress's acknowledgement this program associated with the U.S. code and with this fast code, right? Okay, so from there, then a lot of people did a lot of fancy stuff, I don't know. So when we roll up, make sure you're aware of these few things and then be able to, goes back to it.
Yeah. My only concern with everything you just said is I don't think the states, the counties, the cities, any of those are being considered at that level. And there's been a huge conversation lately, and especially ordering resources and what is agency and what is not agency. And technically, what is agency of any government entity when we're talking about this, right? And so
It could be state.
it could be state, it could be city, it could be any of these things. And I know, like I said, when we're getting orders that say agency only that come through an application, depending on where you go, they're like, that has to be federal.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I think, I think the thing is that with the semantic approach to this, right? And what we've been talking about with the business knowledge blueprints and the work that Gabriella's been doing with the Standards Technology Board. I mean, I think we have the ability to look at this from a variety of perspectives. So federal agencies are defined as XYZ per, blah, 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 right? And say within the interagency wildland fire arena, agency is defined as X, ABC, and these are the roles that they can fill. And what that starts allowing us to do is that as we start understanding these organizations and the fact that they can have multiple roles, so it's not just that they can have multiple roles within wildland fire, as providing being protection, having jurisdiction, there's roles that we know that they have within wildland fire, but we can also start associating the various codes to them so that if somebody wants to come in from a high, we can roll things up, like Lynn was talking about, to answer questions organizationally at different levels and from an agency. I mean, there's no reason why we can't have an organization that has, so if you think about maybe a larger, LA County, is that connected to Irwin, right?
Yeah.
So you got LA County, so they probably have an NWCG unit ID. They probably have a US Fire Administration code. They probably have some code that California has for them. They probably have some organizational code that they use internally, right? There's no reason you couldn't have all of those codes associated with an organization. I think to Steve's point, that's making sure we get to that most atomic unit of an organization. But as long as we understand the hierarchy, which is part of what OIS has, that's really useful, is that regardless of whether or not they have an NWCG unit ID, you still have all of the hierarchy of the organization, and you can roll up and down in it, and you can have all of the codes associated with any of those units at any level. And then if I'm a BLM person and I want to come in and do analysis on FA codes, I can do that. If I'm an interagency person and I want to use NWCG unit IDs, I can do that. So that's really what we're trying to get to, is this understanding of organizations from a variety of views. It's kind of this concept we talked about yesterday with, meeting multiple use cases for multiple users. And we want to do that with organizations and have it managed in one place and have it governed in a way that it's trusted and usable for these multiple use cases. So it's big, and that's why, if this were easy to have solved, it would have been solved,
People wouldn't have quit at very high levels. We're out. No more people on this.
Yeah, so
It used to keep me up at night. I used to have to sleep with a notebook underneath my bed or underneath my pillow, and I would think about, oh wait, we could do this, write it down, oh wait, we could do this. And so finally, I feel like we're all kind of moving the train in the same direction as far as the conversation goes. But I think that's why I always describe it as the two. One tiny thing really is combining these two data sets. The big thing is the schema and the structure.
Yeah, and the concept that the organization data is literally the organization, and that's the big, and just there's unit IDs, but not every unit ID will have an organization, but not every organization will have a unit ID.
They want you to talk. Perhaps Rochelle can give a short comment on.
Yeah, I'm looking through that. Okay, let's see. Compare that one. Okay, so.
Yes.
When I look at the data I got from different bureaus, agencies, offices, and DOI, some of them started with the region. Some started by mission programs, So if in the wildland fire program, we can agree on one.
Well,
Start from,
it's a great.
so here's the program across multiple bureaus and offices. Then each bureau offices has their own way to, the mission program or the region.
No, it's you're talking in words that I understand.
Yep.
Because they're all different. And for example, when we talk about protection, right, the delegation authority of the forest is at the forest level.
Yeah.
So they work to that level for unit identifiers. They identify ranger districts, et cetera, underneath them, but they don't get a unit ID, whereas the BLM is taking a different approach. Fish and Wildlife is taking a different approach. So, and then of course, what all of this I think stemmed from is in the beginning, we all did the best we could. And I think people did an amazing job with the data. Of course, now we get to go back and look at it, and it's always not fun to be the backseat driver analyzing the driver, right? And so I think that's part of it too. We've got folks that have done a lot of work and they're trying to continue, make sure that work goes on and is acknowledged and not reinventing all of that wheel because so much thought went into it. But right, we are taking a step back now and reanalyzing and analyzing.
I would say
And
we know more today. We have better tools today, right? So
anything before the butt gets thrown off, so we're gonna say and.
yeah. And this, friendly awareness.
And with the semantic tools that these regions, these mission programs, it doesn't have to be like a hierarchically managed. They can be this org's attributes. So we, it's a much easier. The tool helps a lot, but still need tons of thoughts to figure it out.
Yeah, we do. Yeah. We do.
Elise had a question, sorry.
I have a lot of questions.
Let me hit this one from Larrabee, and so just briefly, Keith, for as long as I've known him, so he started. I think we both started in 2004, or you started in 2003. Four, yeah. So we both started in 2004. And so as long as I've known him, he has beat me about the head and neck about states.
Gently.
Gently, but yes. And every 6 months or so, he would schedule a call with us and U.S. Fire Administration to talk about NFIRS. And finally, after all of that time, we're at a point where they're actually going to make a new version of NFIRS. And so we've been meeting with the fire administration team that is building that replacement. We've had 3 calls with them, I think. Gotten over Inform, gotten over IDME. We're gonna meet with them again and go over Edge, and then they're gonna go over their architecture and what it is they're looking for, and what they're saying, which is like, is we want to share data and we don't want to replicate data. So they want to figure out how the best mechanism for getting wildfire data without asking their community to enter data in two different sources. And so that's like a super exciting conversation. And one of the components of that conversation is going to be these organizations and the fire administration IDs, and how those function. And so we've kind of touched on that a little bit, but again, if an organization doesn't need an NWCG unit ID, we don't need to give them one. And if there's another ID that we can use in our environment that makes sense, then let's use that. And I think the fire administration IDs for these non-federal entities are probably a really good one for us to look at and consider. And so I think, does that get BJ to what you were wanting to cover on that?
Oh, I see.
Okay, Keith, anything you want to add on that?
The big push from them is their new director.
Right.
And she
She's
is
good.
not a she was a volunteer firefighter in Texas, but she is a data scientist by degree.
Yep.
And so that's a breath of fresh air.
Yeah.
We'll see. We've been doing this for 20 years with them, and it's been a very slow road. I think we talked early on with Erwin. I don't remember which business person we were talking with at the beginning, or Chuck, about, I know it was you, about the unit identifiers, and why are we in that business if there are other organizations who have better understanding of that? One is,
She would appreciate that.
yeah, the other one is the FDID number from U.S. Fire Administration.
Yeah.
Under their own admission, though, they have not maintained it.
Right.
And it's entertaining when we have meetings with them and we go over the grant dollars that they're putting out to FDID numbers that don't exist, to fire departments that they don't have records of. And so they always go, oh. So it's an onion that we're gonna have to peel back. It's gonna take time. I agree that there are many organization codes that we're gonna need some crosswalk to get to the right, in this environment it's this. We have a lot of fire departments, especially in the West, that have unit identifiers. Those all came from the GACs where there were enthusiastic people that were assigning those in those GACs, and that's great. That has been helpful. But we also, and I know Erwin recognizes FDIDs. It's a table in there.
Nobody said
ERS should.
I don't see it very often. Sorry, for me to call you out.
No idea, to be completely honest.
I don't think I see it
ERS should
often.
be the only one.
And that would make sense.
And because of this, what they're doing, so NFIRS is not a system, it's a database, it's a structure. And they have, over the decades that it's been involved, they've allowed private vendors to develop solutions to become NFIRS certified to be able to send their data to NFIRS. At one point, there were close to 450 vendors, all the way from, my favorite is Jeff and Henry's Computer Tent Emporium.
Yeah.
That was one. And so, I mean, they have, kids in high school, whatever, some big ones, and they've kind of been swallowed up. And so there's like 3 big players right now that we're seeing. All 3 of those companies, one is currently attached or connected to Erwin Integrated, that's Emergency Reporting ERS, which was bought out by ESO in Austin, Texas. And they're in the process of updating their integration package.
Yeah, and then Steve's saying Inform, recognize the fire department ID too.
Yeah.
I don't think I've seen it populated though, maybe once in a blue moon. And I think this is part of this whole thing, right? This is why, for my own sanity, I've had compartmentalize it a little bit, the organization piece, and then how. So I think
It's two different things. very
it's two
definitely.
different things, and, you know, trying to keep everyone on the same page and then for their expectations to be able to do it or how it would work, so back to you.
I don't know what our standard is for use of the FDID number, but they can have duplicate numbers from state to state because they all start off
You
one.
have to
But
include
you
the
have to
state.
include the state FIPS
Yeah.
code at the beginning. That needs to make it.
Get unique. Like in.
And I don't know if that's in our
Use it
use
that way.
case. That's something for Don to look up.
ERS and search do use fire department.
Yes, Mary said we just do it in ERS and sometimes in informal.
Please.
So I have questions on the timeline, of course. So when are you expecting the apps to be reading this data?
So
Or
we
using.
are, our priority when we get back from this meeting is to get, so Dawn has been working to understand the APIs from both of the systems that exist, OIS and Unit IDX, so that we can replicate those as closely as possible. So our goal is to not give you an API that is totally different than what you've been using to get organizational data. And we recognize that's probably going to be two different formats because OIS and Unit IDX have slightly different formats. So that's our first goal, is to try and replicate that as closely as possible, minimize changes that you have to do.
So as far as timing.
Yeah, I don't know if you have a sense for where we're at with that.
Not until, a lot of that depends on how the schema ends up in Edge.
I think we have
Schema's not done.
I think it is pretty much done. We're doing a little bit of a refinement as we learn more.
And, yeah, so we've got the schema, but they don't fit into the schema, and that's part of putting them in there and getting how they'll fit. I mean, again, who was up there drawing yesterday? So I have to picture this visually.
Yeah.
And when I think of
Because
it.
it came from two different
Is
data.
there a
Right.
visual here of all of this? When you're saying picture it visually, is there a picture of all of this and how it comes together somewhere?
I'm working on one. I have one that I've started in Visio that I've started to pull together.
I don't know if Edge can give us a picture of what we're kind of doing, Gabriella, can it? If, almost even a baby crosswalk, kind of, is that what you're thinking?
It's kind of like,
Yeah,
like how you're saying it's
yeah.
a full visual.
I'll share with you what I have so far, and then I kind of. That we're not done.
So what I'm hearing is that you want to have some sort of a diagram.
Oh, no, just what she said, is just, you know, how the diagram, like how it all comes together. I think it really does help
Yeah,
us to understand what are we.
instead of just like, okay, well, here's the URL.
Types of things, that'd be amazing.
Yeah, because my next question was, in the timeline, it doesn't appear to be you're like, the apps aren't in the timeline, like working with them.
Yeah,
I thought I had something in there, and I'm sorry if I didn't.
well, I think there's
Oh, the
a newer
workflow.
version that
Oh, yeah.
on the team. And that was part of getting that API, getting those APIs out for you guys to start testing and touching as soon as possible. So that's our goal. We know that's a priority for you.
Well, and with the expectation, right, so we're in limbo, otherwise known as purgatory. Right? And integration testing for them is in January. And so in preparation, should they be expected to be pointed to which one, right?
Yeah.
And so, and the other thing too is, I think we all know this, from a business perspective, there's some work that's done first week of January every year when we deactivate. Activating is easy. Deactivating is there's a ton of stuff that gets impacted, like the SIT, the 209, et cetera. The CADs, IROC, right? This is no longer a current unit identifier, et cetera. And so that work at this point will need to be completed in the current systems. So just keeping I know Julie, like, I heard Julie say multiple times, we really need to do this in calendar year. We really need to do this in calendar year. And so I just want to put that into the next of the considerations. And does the combination just need to be done by the calendar year?
That's the question I have. Are we expected to be using this by March?
Yeah, that puts.
Because that is gonna be rough for us.
So, how is that gonna be?
Well, we're doing Irwin. We're integrating with ICBS right now. This isn't our only workload. So us changing our mapping and all of that adds to what we already have going on.
So there needs to be like a whole cutover plan.
Yes.
Like, if I see it as March is when it's gonna be available, so we could pivot, but then each team's gonna have to figure out when can they, it's not just capacity, but maybe contract cycles or to that nature. So that doesn't mean you get to, like, you know, do a hard shut off of builds.
Exactly.
Maybe a trend.
I think, you know, part of what we're trying to balance out, right? SMEs managing data, the same data in two different systems. There is some connectivity and data sharing that exists now that didn't exist before that helps. I just want to minimize the amount of time that we have three locations for the same data, and figure out how to handle that. But also if we have to extend the transition time because it is more complicated than we think, then we'll have to deal with that. But
So I think though.
and I want to get, I know Nonman's had his hand up for a minute here, so I want to give him a chance. Mr. Nonaman?
Hey there. Sorry, I don't have great connectivity, but what I was just wanting to make sure, you know, we talked about before was, you know, I think there's two pieces we need to focus on. One is the, you know, the two H's and the two F's of the both systems, the who, the how, the frequency, and the format that people use the data from OIS and Unit ID. That inventory is still critical, and I think we have a pretty good idea. And then the second part we had talked about in our meeting was the sooner we can at least get something that can replicate that format in Edge, then those systems can make that determination of, oh, wow, you did it identical. It's a JSON format. It's got these data elements and it's got this. Hey, I just need to point to an URL. So if it turns out to be that, then that's good news. And I don't think there'll be nearly as much trepidation. If it turns out, well, it's not just a different path. We're going to have a different format. You're only going to be able to get it once a week. You know, I mean, if there's other factors, that's what's going to cause the consternation and delays. So I really do think, if, like I said, if we get those two H's, F's, and then get just something stood up, you know, and I think we tried this, we said it September, October, somewhere around there, because then people will have about 5 or 6 months to go, okay, no big deal, or half and half, or whatever it turns out to be. But anyways, that's just my thought. Thanks.
Yeah, that's super valuable. I did want to say though, as well, what you were saying is part of the variables now, that right now, the two systems basically are feeding into Edge. Not yet, but that's the plan, right? That they would come into Edge. We brought the data in, but they're not being fed by service. And then we would flip that, and once we did all the quality control, figured out the scheme, et cetera, then we would go back to the systems. So the apps would still be pointing to their systems, but they'd only be maintained in one place, and you'd only have the one data set, not three. And then when there's a comfort level there, then we would go back straight into one service. I think is how we wrote it to make that cleaner. I'll do that one for a minute.
This is the more current one. And this would be available for the applications to test in this time frame. I had to find the document, sorry.
Anyway, let's talk about that one offline a little bit, because it's one of the things that we were contemplating that gave us all a sigh of relief for the applications. Yeah.
I think back to what Carlos said yesterday, right? Like, okay, so if we don't do this, what's the alternative?
Yeah.
And, you know, you've been talking about doing this for a couple of years now. And one of the things I learned on Irwin is that it's great to talk about things. It's great for the forest task group to develop, 52 new standards, but when you actually start implementing it and there's some urgency, that's when people start paying attention and we find the things that we haven't considered. And so I just think we're at that phase, right? And so putting out a timeline and putting a date on it doesn't mean that we're gonna like go in and arbitrarily flip switches and shut stuff off and break things. But it does mean that we're really serious about this. And if you haven't been paying attention and participating, we need you to really start doing that now, because we're really trying to get this timeline lined out and start making this happen. And this, like I said, this is the first big data set, reference data set that we're looking at doing this on. And, maybe we could have found some smaller ones to work on, but the fact is this is one that has been problematic for a long time. And the fact that we have these two systems that have, 85% of the data is the same in both of them, just it's like fingernails on a chalkboard to me. So just trying to get that resolved for us, so.
And Michelle, would this eventually go into the data marketplace where people would hit the?
Yeah, I think that's part of what we also get to work out, right? As IDB comes up and the marketplace is available, like what's going to be the easiest way for people to be able to access this, and how do we support the community to do stuff easily? The organizational data is going to be in IDME because it's going to be, it's going to be used to refine data and will be part of various dimensional models. But yeah, so it's, again, kind of thinking about that process of where does the steward govern these controlled vocabularies, and then how do we implement it and make that available for operationalizing? And so there's a partnership there, right?
She says it much better than just two heads. Okay. More questions? I know you do.
No, I totally get the need. I do. I just am concerned about now we know, and the timeline is what I'm concerned about.
Yeah.
So I just want to make that known.
So
And,
I think to John's point, the biggest issue is, can we replicate the existing services to the degree that you don't have to make changes? If we can't do that, if the schema changes enough that we can't do that, then we'll adjust the timelines to accommodate that.
Well, the other thing too is, okay, so you saw in there the note, we started off with Donovan and Shannon and Nick and Michelle's team and now that we're sort of have an idea, because everyone wants more meetings, it's do we dedicate a certain amount of time and a certain amount of scheduled meeting for updates on this and where we are and what we're doing? Because now is the point where I get concerned that folks aren't on the same page, right? That you're not hearing the same thing that Don's hearing, et cetera. And so that's something that's worth it.
Yeah, and I think, again, trying to figure out managed communications, right? I do think that, we tend to lean on the extended team calls for Irwin as a way to help get this information out. So if you're connected to Irwin, we definitely are wanting to coordinate that way.
We've been doing it last couple of, it's been very helpful.
Yeah, and as we get Adobe Campaign up, then we'll be, sending out notifications that way as well and trying to get that information out there. We're also, Jill's going to talk about our webpage and some of the stuff that we're doing there, and just trying to find better ways to get this and make this information available so that you can find it when you need it.
So I had a needed a piece of organizations.
Yeah.
I want to move on to.
Yeah, you might as well, and I don't have a image of that time. So we switch computers.
No, you can use it, not just it.
Oh, I don't need glasses.
You can see.
We are of an age where
I don't, we sit in front of that a couple years ago, I'm like, hang on, I can't read any of this.
Share. Let's figure out.
Talk amongst yourselves.
Yeah. Which one to go, blah, blah, blah.
Tell you used to teach fourth grade.
Fourth grade, that's such a great age. That's when they start understanding sarcasm.
It was so much fun.
Yeah, great developmental stage. You could say something and they don't say English.
And I did have some videos of this. So we want.
Maybe you can make it without her.
Do you want me to grab some videos?
Yeah, I
I
think
can
that's
probably
gonna be
talk
good,
to-
because
There was one.
this is much more a work in progress.
Yeah, okay.
Fuzzy, keep it.
Should we just bring my computer over?
Yeah, I think that's gonna be the easy button. And you can have it on the tall standing part if you like.
You don't know what you're gonna get. Oh. TORO.
Oh, that's what she was saying. Yeah.
You get it over to the park.
Yeah, it's harder.
Should we just give everyone a break?
Because none of the computers like to have batteries.
Okay, let's take a 5-minute break while they get set up. You can see this here.
Right, yeah. That's how it is.